Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. We're going to give everyone just another minute to join, and then we will begin today's webinar. All right, well, I think we are good to get started. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us today. Really appreciate you dedicating some time to come to the Goliath webinar today on benchmarking end user experience against industry standards. By ways of introductions, you have myself, Avi Lip. I'm a technical consultant with Goliath, as well as Kip Sims, who's a member of our product management team, who on short notice was able to help fill in today. And unfortunately, we didn't get a chance to get a picture for him quite yet. But Kip, want to thank you for joining the call today. So while we wait for a few more people to join, wanted to go over a couple of housekeeping items before we dive into the content. In terms of an agenda today, we're going to be focusing on some of the common use cases that exist when it comes to benchmarking end user experience analytics. We'll then explain why benchmarking is hard. We'll talk through the criteria that you should think about when picking a technology and the services to assist you with benchmarking. And finally, we're going to end with a use case and really talk about an organization that went out to benchmark end user experience, the data that they used, and how they achieved it. We're going to hold off on questions until the end, but please submit them throughout in the chat box. And we have time blocked off at the end of today's webinar to make sure that we answer your questions. And quite frankly, that is one of our favorite parts of the webinar, is being able to interact with all of you on the line. And we always do appreciate the questions so that we can best support what you're looking for. Now, one question that we always get is, will this recording be available afterwards? And the answer is yes. Within the next 24 hours, you'll have a copy of the recording that you can refer back to or even share with your colleagues. And so with that, Kip, would you like to get us started?
Sure. Thanks, Avi. And by the way, everybody is already active here, so we're getting a lot of questions in the chat, and we'll certainly get to them. So thanks, everyone, for some of the questions are preempting what I'm going to say. So let me tell you a little story about how we decided to build benchmarking analytics into our product and really enhance our overall reporting capability. So we started to talk to customers, as we typically do, and ask them what their coming needs are and things like that. And they started telling us that they really want to do more benchmarking. They want to understand, for example, and you'll see the bullet points here are some examples. They want to understand whether IT is doing a good job. How are we doing against Citrix best practices, for example, or VMware Horizon best practices, right? People have service level agreements maybe. A lot of our health systems have 30-second log on and 10-second reconnect. So they have these 30/10 SLAs, and they want to monitor or report on whether or not they're meeting those SLAs. People that are doing migrations or upgrades for performance reasons want to understand whether they actually worked, right? And so there are plenty of also reasons around compliance, troubleshooting, et cetera. So a lot of reasons for benchmarking that we were given by our customers. So if you go to the next slide, Avi, please. So we said to the customer, well, how are you doing it today? And a lot of them said, we're having real challenges. And they're having real challenges benchmarking end user experience because most of the products that are there, monitoring products, are focused on IT element performance. And what I mean is server monitors monitor servers, storage monitors storage, network is network. And what you're doing is looking at these metrics and saying, well, there's plenty of network capacity. There seems to be enough server resources, so therefore end user experience must be okay. So they're inferring end user experience, not actually monitoring actual end user experience. They have to use lots of data sources and products. You go to the Citrix team, and the Citrix team has sort of a kludge of director, the new name they're attaching to analytics, but it's very kludgy. There are multiple data sources, not easy to understand. A lot of tools out there don't retain data long enough to do any of this benchmarking. One of our competitors, great product, but a competitor, ControlUp, doesn't keep data for a long period of time. And so it's really hard to do that. Other technologies will roll data up, right? So they'll average out data so it's not as useful. And then they would say to us that it takes a lot of Citrix expertise and analytical expertise to be able to make any sense out of the data, even if they're able to get it. So those were the challenges that they described to us. So what we did, if you go to the next slide, Avi, is we set about making some technology enhancements. So what we did is use embedded intelligence and automation. By doing this, they don't have to be a Citrix expert, and they don't have to dedicate a full-time employee or much time at all to be able to get the information they need to do benchmarking. So we automated this entire process of collecting, correlating, and then interpreting the data, right? Really important to automate this because it'll take less time, and you got to interpret it so that people don't have to, be a Citrix expert to be able to derive useful information relative to benchmarking. So if you go to the next slide, talking more specifically about the solution. So we have a product that's and services, of course, that are purpose-built from the end user's experience point of view, and that's important. So, as I said, network tools will tell you what how the network is performing, but you don't know by looking at the network performance if there's enough network or if it's impacting the end user's experience, right? You don't have to have Citrix analytics expertise or Citrix expertise. We're getting you detailed metrics from initiation to disconnect, from the early stages of the logon process, the whole way through using the session until they disconnect. And then we decided to retain the data in its native form for as long as you need it. That's totally up to you. We don't truncate it, roll it up, or average it. This is all up to you in terms of what data you're selecting and then how long you want to keep it for. So this sort of frames up the solution that we came up with and is really kind of a feature set that we leverage to be able to deliver benchmarking to our clients. If you go to the next slide, Avi. So let's talk about how a client used this in an actual use case. And I'm glad Avi's doing this webinar instead of the other folks in the department, because he actually was involved with this financial planning and investment firm. So let me frame up, if I can, the story. And by the way, the questions keep coming in. This is really cool. So we'll make sure we get to them. So the client success story is this. So they had a challenge, and like everyone else during the pandemic, I think this is about a year ago that this occurred. They had a surge of remote workers, right? There was an increase in complaints around Citrix latency and logon performance. And so management came to them and said, look, we think we're seeing a lot more tickets, a lot more complaints. At least that's what the data shows. But how big of a problem is this, right? How do we frame up what the problem is so we can then apply resources to be able to solve it, right? So what the IT team did, which is not unusual, is they went to their internal resources. They went to the Citrix team. Unfortunately, they only had Director and some of the new Citrix analytics, which really don't give much of a complete picture. They went to the network team, and the network team was able to give them those specifics about the network. The same thing with the storage team and the same thing with the server team. And what they came up with were a lot of IT elements that were performing well and didn't give them visibility into what the root cause of latency and the logon performance issues were. So what they did is they engaged with Goliath. If you want to go to the next slide, Avi. So what they did is they engaged with us, okay? And they selected us to do a 90-day benchmarking service. Believe me, we tried to sell product, but they didn't want any product. They had plenty of monitoring tools. But so they decided on a benchmarking service. We did a turnkey deployment. So that means we sort of did the white glove treatment, right? They gave us access. They requested a server. We got all the particulars done in terms of change control, etc. And so we set about our work. In an environment that has 8,200 users and 5 international locations, I think it's important to point out that it took us only 2 hours to be able to deploy our technology and begin to get benchmarking metrics and performance metrics, okay? So we were able to document the actual end user experience, and we're going to show you some of these screenshots as well. We benchmarked the end user experience. We were able to highlight areas for improvement and actually solve some issues as well. And then we established a baseline, and they're still using the technology now, or the service rather, since we did this about a year ago. So they're still using the service on a monthly basis to provide baselining throughout the environment. Now, what Avi's going to show you are a couple of the, I think one screenshot, and I think 3 of the reports that we did specifically for this client. And as I said, Avi had the chance to be involved with this one and do some of the initial presentation. So, Avi?
Yeah, thanks, Kip. And it was a pleasure working with the client and presenting some of our findings to them. So the first report that we showed them and presented to them was this high-level scorecard, where since within the technology, we're pulling in all the deep and granular metrics around end user experience. What we do is we then create the graph where it's showing those individual metrics such as round trip time, latency, network latency, and connection speed available for that user wherever they're working from, to really paint a real detailed picture of that user's experience. And then what we do is, based off of pulling in these deep and granular metrics, have them ranked based off excellent, good, fair, poor, based off of different criteria from industry best practices of what is excellent, what is poor. And then, since you can easily see any scenarios where, say, there was a poor performance metric, it allows IT not just to see the overall user score, which is compiled of all these different data points, but you can see if there is a poor score, where specifically that poor score is coming from. Was it a network related issue? Was it the lack of bandwidth available for that user at their location? And then, since we're collecting all of this on an individual user basis, it's easy to then roll it up onto an overall end user experience score, which you can see on the top left, where you're having these metrics from the overall end user perspective to have a baseline. Was this environment performing optimally? What was the user experience? And this is something that management was very intrigued by having, not just understanding a specific score, but being able to understand the metrics behind it, what's driving it, and most importantly, where are the areas for improvement. And this report can be filtered based off of time, specific subsets of the environment. Following presenting this graph, we also had a graph where we were able to show them that log-on times were an issue, where we're able to trend the log-on times per the specific stages, per the specific application, locations, based off of the date of when these logons were coming through, and then also when the logons were occurring. So that with this information, we were able to diagnose specific issues within their logons, because we're collecting, again, this deep and granular metric where within the console, not only are we just reporting on and being able to show this from a high level perspective, but you can then drill into the individual user sessions right within the console and be able to quickly pinpoint where there was a high logon time, what was that root cause. And in this particular example, here there was a logon time that was over 200 seconds. You're able to quickly see that it was a profile load issue. Drill down to the group policies, see that a specific drive mapping policy was taking up over 180 seconds. In this case, it was easy to find out that it was because that extension was incorrectly mapped out. The team was able to take the data that we were providing, immediately recognize where they can make the improvements, and they were able to cut down on their logon times for certain users by over 40% because of a combination of the benchmarking data, understanding where they were having performance issues, and then the deep end user experience metrics within the console to be able to pinpoint exactly where within each individual user sessions that there could have been those potential issues. Now, with After that finding, where I'll talk about another report that we were able to then show them, where they were interested in understanding who was using Citrix, when, and how. And this is one of those reports where it's an end user productivity report that we had that's unique to Goliath. And the client, they were interested in more than just when a user logged on and when they logged off for the day. They wanted to have an understanding of their level of productivity. How much were they actually interacting within their Citrix sessions? And that's exactly what this report does. And for any of our out-of-the-box reports, you can run them on demand, daily, weekly, monthly. You can have them sent up to different business line managers. So for this particular client here, I mean, we've changed some of the names on here just out of respect for them, but you can see here on the left-hand side, some end users. You can see the client IP address, how they connected into the environment, the specific server that they were accessing, when the session started, when the session changed. So we'll take this first user as an example, Randy. He logged in at 9, then logged off at 5 o'clock. So the duration of the session was for 9 hours. And then this is where it becomes unique to Goliath, is being able to report on their actual interaction time within the session, which is compiled of a number of different data points, such as mouse click, keyboard input, generating ICA traffic. So what we were able to see is that Randy was interacting within his session for 7 of the 9 hours, was inactive for 2 of them. His max inactivity time was 42 minutes. So the max amount of time that he was inactive was 42 minutes, maybe stepped out for lunch. And then the percent interaction time of roughly 78%, as well as the specific applications that were being used within the session. So this is another report that the client was able to leverage to understand, with so many people working remotely, how were they actually being able to be productive, as well as all the other benchmarking metrics that we touched on. Now with that, Kip, I believe I'm going to now pass it back over to you to discuss how anyone on the line is able to get started with these type of benchmarking statistics.
Sure. Thanks, Avi. So natural question just before Q&A is, so this is great. How do I get access to these types of metrics? In 2 ways, really. You can do it yourself. Just give us a call after the webinar or email us and let us know. There's no software purchase necessary. There's a subscription to the software. You can deploy it yourself, or we can help you deploy it. Then there's a whole service offering, right? So it's turnkey. It's a totally managed service. We handle the benchmarking, and we just give you the reports. And so the cost is dependent on the size of the environment. By the way, this is an actual chat question as well. So you might want to go to the next slide, Avi. But and we'll kick off with this very first question, which is, so how much does this cost? And so it depends on the size of the environment. It depends on the reports and the data that you want to see, how long you want to retain the data, and then where do you want the product to be hosted? Do you want us to host it, or do you want to host it on premises? So those are really the factors that contribute to the cost equation. So it's really sort of low footprint in terms of coming up with that analysis. And usually it's a 30-minute introductory call that we can go through with a brief review of your environment and what you'd like to see. So moving into the chat messages, by the way, thanks so much for all the messages, the questions that you've sent us. And by the way, this slide, everybody's got a slide like this that shows the great customers they have. But the takeaway from this slide is really twofold. One is our technology scales to some of the largest Citrix environments in the world, but we have a price and ease of use profile that gives us our technology the ability to even be used by small to medium-sized businesses that are also having end user experience issues or want these types of benchmarking metrics. Okay, so first question, where did you get the name Kip? I cannot tell you. That came from my parents, and I'm not sure why. There are no Kips in my immediate family, but thank you for that question. I know it's a little bit of an odd name. this is a question that came in at the beginning of the presentation. Do I have to buy the product to get these reports? Obviously, we answered that, right? So you don't have to buy the product. Everything is done as a service, whether it's a service you manage, of course, or we manage. How do you get the actual data? Now, I'm assuming this means how do we, Goliath, get the actual data? And we use a series of agent and agentless approaches. We leverage APIs to be able to pull metrics and data around specific end user experience protocols as well. The good news is that unlike a lot of technologies out there, you don't have to use any scripting. You don't have to do anything on your own. So our product automatically deploys, automatically discovers the environment, and it will pull the metrics and correlate them in an automated fashion. So that's what we talk about when we talk about embedded intelligence and automation. And how that nets out to you in terms of benefit is you don't spend a lot for the product or a lot for the service. That's why in a example where there are 8,200 users in 5 international locations, we were able to deploy and begin getting metrics in less than 2 hours. And I mean running reports, and setting all the reports up and things like that. Question here: how do you know if latency is good or bad? That's a good question. Instead of having to refer to sort of Citrix best practices documents, maybe what we've done in terms of embedded intelligence is we've put some interpretive lines in our technology. Avi, can you pull up the product real quickly, or a screenshot of the ICA HDX drill down tab and show where some of these interpretation lines?
Yeah, absolutely. And these data interpretation lines are great for allowing an IT pro that's an L1, help desk, or all the way up through the engineering stack to be able to quickly understand, is the latency metric in a particular session good or poor? And these data interpretation lines that Kip was just referring to are built all throughout the technology. So say, for example, if you were trying to take a look at one of the different graphs and understand, was that user's round trip time high, which is poor, or was it low, and that's a good thing? And we have if you notice that red and amber line going across to that top left-hand chart, the red line for round trip time is right now set for 450 milliseconds, and you have that amber line set to 350 milliseconds. And the reason why that's important here is those data interpretation lines are pointing out when latency is likely apparent to the end user. And what you can see based off of the round trip time line, which is that light blue line, is that it's well above those data interpretation lines. So it's very easy to quickly see that at the end of this user's session that they were experiencing latency because round trip time was so high at the end of the session. You can quickly see during the first half it was fine, but then again at the end of the session is where they started experiencing high round trip time, and it's very easy to benchmark that based off of those data interpretation lines.
Thanks, Avi. And I think the important, with this particular example, it's pretty evident, right? If you have a spike like that, it's not a good thing, right? But how bad is it, right? So by putting the interpretation lines, and you could hover over network latency just real quickly, Avi, it's over network latency as well. So as he said, at a glance, you don't have to try to interpret whether the end user is being impacted. You know darn well that if it's in between those two lines, the end user is being impacted. Thanks for that, Avi.
Sure.
Let me see. Oh, if I do a benchmarking service with Goliath and we find issues, will you also troubleshoot those issues? Yes, we will, and we did in this last example. It is many times we will start to do a benchmarking service, and it's unnatural for people to say, hey, I'd like a block. First of all, I'd like you to engage you to troubleshoot these issues, and I'd like a block of hours that we can use to utilize Goliath, your Citrix experts, NetScaler experts, to be able to help troubleshoot issues. Because remember, on our consulting services side of the business, we are not limited to Citrix, VMware, etc. We have experts for any aspect of the environment, including network, storage, etc. So that's a natural outcrop of that. We also, yes, the next question is about health checks. Another sort of name for benchmarking, I guess, is Citrix health checks. And so that's a 3-day engagement. People will ask us to do sort of a health check and tell us how are things within the environment. It's often done a lot of times before consulting services engagements of other companies like HCL or Tech Mahindra start. They want a baseline. It's often done too before some sort of a migration. So if somebody engages another partner to do like a VDI rollout or something like that, or an upgrade, many times they'll have us in and have us benchmark or do a health check to see what the baseline of performance is before this entire upgrade happens. How long do you keep the data? Another great question. It's really up to you. You know, we have organizations that keep it up to 6 months, you know, or longer. So as long as you need to keep it, you can keep it. It's just a function of how many metrics you want to keep and the appetite for database size. Do you aggregate and roll up the data? No, we don't. And that's really a differentiating feature of our technology, because once you roll up and average out the data, you can't answer the question, look, I've had a clinician, let's say, that's been complaining about performance issues for the last 6 months. I mean, where do you go over the last 90 days? Where do you go to get that physician's information? Most organizations, especially products that put the data in the cloud, have to average it out and roll it up just from an expense perspective. It makes sense to do it that way because unless you bend the laws of physics, you're gonna spend a lot of money on storage for that granular detail. The problem becomes that it makes it unusable for good long-term analysis or trending. Do I need to run scripts? I think this was earlier in the presentation. We don't have any scripting. Other technologies do have scripting libraries and things like that. Now you can utilize and leverage scripts in our product, and you can script away if you'd like to, but the whole notion of embedded intelligence and automation is that you don't have to script. I mean, to script, you've got to know what what data you're trying to pull and things like that. We do all that work for you, especially when it comes to the benchmarking. Do we support Citrix Cloud? Yes, we absolutely do. And how are reports and data shared? We have a number of methods that we can share any amount of data. If you saw the data in the product, you can put it in some form of a report, whether it's a report within our technology, like an out-of-the-box report. We share it with third-party reporting tools. Power BI is a big one that we see used a lot, as well as Tableau. Those are both common. And even down to your basic spreadsheets. We actually, you know, it's interesting when people are trying to troubleshoot, when IT will use our technology to do troubleshooting, sometimes they'll even take screenshots of the end user experience drill down area that Avi was on and send them to people to prove that using a screenshot that it isn't the data center that's the issue. It's maybe possibly connection speed or their home office environment. And that's a great way that people share the data beyond just metrics. Those are all the questions I have that have been sent in. That was great, Avi, so good participation from the audience. Thanks everybody for your time. Avi, I'll pass it back to you.
Great, thanks, Kip. And thank you everyone for the engagement on today's call. Really do appreciate all the questions. Hope today's session was very valuable for you. On the slide right here, if there is any interest in learning more about anything that was covered today or the other aspects of either the technology or any of the services that we offer, there's the techinfo@goliathtechnologies.com email right at the bottom that you can certainly be able to inquire about any information. We'll get back to you as soon as possible. And again, just want to thank you guys so much for your time, for joining today's session. Have a great Memorial Day weekend, and hope to talk with you all soon.